It's been a very big day of voting coast to coast across the United States. We started with states like Vermont and Virginia closing polling places several hours ago. Now California is the latest state to stop voting. There's actually only one state still voting, and that is Alaska. And we have quite a lot of results, and it has been a very good day for both of the leading contenders on both the Republican and the Democratic side. Let's start with the Republican Party and the race there. There are 15 races, 15 states, primary contests that are being decided today. The first one that was closed today, the first one that's been counted for the longest, is Vermont. And in fact there, Donald Trump has not won. That is one that we can now say Nikki Haley is projected to win. Not by a very big margin, a handful of percentage points is the margin there, but that is the first state that Nikki Haley has won. It means she's won a second contest. She won the Washington, D.C. nominating contest earlier in the week, and it's prevented Donald Trump from winning a clean sweep, 15 out of 15 states. So that is a significant result. Having said that, it is only 17 delegates in that state, so it's not going to make a massive difference to the overall trajectory of where this race is going, because as you can see, Donald Trump has won Virginia, North Carolina, Maine, Massachusetts, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Alabama. We can bring you some more states as well. Donald Trump has won Arkansas, Colorado, Minnesota, Texas. Utah, he's currently ahead in. There's just a very tiny portion of vote that's been counted there. And we're watching states like California, where the votes will start to come in now, because if Donald Trump can win more than half the vote, he'll win every single one of those 169 delegates. That will turbocharge his path to the nomination. Here's where the delegates stand for the Republican Party at the moment. At the moment, we've got Donald Trump. The Associated Press is projecting Donald Trump on 413 convention delegates. You need 1,215, half of all the delegates, to mathematically clinch this nomination. He will get a lot higher than this today. It just takes longer to work out the delegate allocations compared to who wins in the state, because the rules are more complicated there. By the end of Super Tuesday, my expectation is he will be right up here, right at the cusp of winning the nomination. Not quite able to get there today. He might be able to get there next week, maybe the week after if he can't do it. But really, it's virtually a certainty now that Donald Trump will collect enough delegates to be his party's pick for president. On the Democratic side, it's been a very good night for Joe Biden. He sweeped all of the states: Iowa, Vermont, Virginia, North Carolina, Maine, Massachusetts, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Alabama. We can continue to the second page as well. Arkansas, Colorado, Minnesota, Texas, Utah. Hang on, who's that? American Samoa is the one race that Joe Biden has lost. That's Jason Palmer. He's a Baltimore-based investor. American Samoa is an interesting race. There were 91 votes, 51 for Jason Palmer, 40 for Joe Biden. He has lost that contest. I understand Jason Palmer was on American Samoa in the last few days. That might explain why he's got so many votes there. But I don't think Joe Biden's losing much sleep over it. It's a very small number of delegates. It's a bit of an oddity in a race in a day that he's done very, very well in. And sadly for people of American Samoa, they don't actually get to vote come November. So this is their moment to sort of make a statement. They have been known to sort of buck the trend in previous primaries, but one race that Joe Biden hasn't won. And that means he will, again, on the delegate count, storm his way today. 497, that will continue to grow through the day. Again, he won't get to quite a majority today. He needs a couple more weeks to get there.
Casey, thank you. Let's bring in our North America correspondent, Carrington Clark, now. He's in Washington. Hi there, Carrington. So what do these results mean for the Republican race?
Although it looks like basically Donald Trump swept the board when it came to the Republican races, there are some glimmers of hope for those who don't want him to be the Republican nominee. Nikki Haley did get that surprise win in Vermont. It gives her first state victory to go along with her victory in DC. But there are also states where Donald Trump just isn't getting a huge amount of the vote. Obviously in Vermont, he got the lowest share, which is 46%. His highest share was in Alabama. But we are kind of seeing these two completely separate sections of the Republican Party. In the Northeast, Nikki Haley has that support. Vermont is right next to New Hampshire, which is a state we visited during the primary season when they had their vote. And she got fairly close to Donald Trump in that contest. Vermont would have heard a lot from Nikki Haley in that period, would have seen a lot of her ads as well. So it's not a real surprise that she was able to do well. The question for Donald Trump, though, is that 30 to 40% vote of people in some states that are voting for Nikki Haley, are they willing to come back into his column come November? Or are these rusted on anti-Trump voters, or as Donald Trump might refer to them, rhinos, Republican in name only, who won't actually join the Trump bandwagon come November? And the bigger question perhaps is, will Nikki Haley's donor, and these are the big pocketed donors who've kept her campaign going even as she's faced these losses after losses, whether or not they're going to actually put their money behind Donald Trump, as it seems almost certain that he will become the presumptive nominee of the Republican Party. Now, as you would expect, Donald Trump has been out tonight to claim this as a victory. Important to note that he made this speech just before the Vermont result was announced by the Associated Press. I'm not sure if that was deliberate, but it meant that he was able to claim a full victory before we got that Vermont result in. And importantly, he never mentioned Nikki Haley by name. But this was Donald Trump a little earlier claiming victory on Super Tuesday.
And they tell me, the pundits and otherwise, that there's never been one like this. There's never been anything so conclusive. This was an amazing night, an amazing day. It's been an incredible period of time in our country's history. It's been sad in so many ways, but I think it's going to be inspiring because we're going to do something that, frankly, nobody's been able to do for a long time.
Now, Nikki Haley, going into Super Tuesday, had basically just assured people that she was in the race up until Super Tuesday. She hasn't given an assurance that she will continue the race from here. You would expect they will now carefully look at the results to see if there is a pathway, even if it is particularly narrow, for her to continue to walk. But also remember the context here, that it was just yesterday that the US Supreme Court actually decided that Donald Trump was eligible to be on the ballots for these primary contests, overturning a decision by the Colorado Supreme Court, which knocked him off the state ballot in Colorado because they said he was an insurrectionist through his incitement and support of the January 6th attack on the US Capitol. And Donald Trump is still laboured by huge amounts of legal problems. And he's still facing 91 criminal counts. He's got 4 potential criminal trials to go before November. So there are different avenues that you might think might somehow knock him out of the race. But at this point, on the delegate count, it's hard to see how Nikki Haley could do anything to stop his status as the nominee for the Republican Party.
So on the Democratic side then, Carrington, have the fears of a protest vote against Joe Biden come to fruition?
There are definitely some worrying signs for Joe Biden. Now, this all comes back to what we saw in Michigan last week. We were there on the ground in Michigan, where we saw this uncommitted campaign by members of the progressive community of the Democratic Party in Michigan. They have a particularly large Arab American population in Michigan, and they are angry about Joe Biden's steadfast support for Israel in its bombardment of Gaza. And we saw quite a high number of protest votes against Joe Biden. More than 100,000 people turned out and voted against him. What we're seeing today in Minnesota potentially is an even bigger percentage vote against Joe Biden. Now, this is a concern because these are Democratic voters. These are people who are bothering to turn up to vote in a Democratic primary. They don't need to. And then they're voting against the man who is obviously going to be the candidate. The question is, of course, whether or not that is just a protest at this point. They want to see a change of direction on particularly the issue of Gaza, or whether or not these are people who are saying we will not support Joe Biden if he is the candidate come November. So there's a lot for both sides to pass about what these votes against their obvious candidates are and whether or not those people are going to show up once we have those votes in November.
Carrington, thank you. Casey Briggs is still with us. So, Casey, even though Donald Trump and Joe Biden are now essentially the presumptive nominees, there is still a long way to go before Election Day in November.
Yeah, and the sort of uncompetitiveness of this race, Roz, has meant that we're entering a general election mode, you know, particularly unusually early. November is a long way off, and there is quite a lot of time for the political landscape to change from here. Donald Trump and Joe Biden, indeed, their statements tonight have largely been about each other rather than their sort of intra-party challenges, because they're thinking about that general election, and there are many other dates looming large. So later this month, Donald Trump is currently scheduled to face his first criminal trial. This is the one over allegations of hush money paid to Stormy Daniels in the 2016 campaign. That's just the first, though. He's got 3 other trials on the cards, but the timelines are quite rubbery, particularly in the 2 federal cases, which is currently before the Supreme Court. On April 22nd, the court will hear arguments over Trump's claim of immunity from prosecution. Whether those federal cases go ahead, and importantly, whether they have time to go ahead before November, that is in the hands of the Supreme Court justices. When you fast forward a few months, though, the electoral timetable really gets going. The 2 parties will formally name their candidates, and those presumptive nominees, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, they'll become the actual nominees. That's in July for the Republicans and August for the Democrats. Then the general election is off in earnest. Presidential debates are supposed to start in September. I say supposed to because Donald Trump has, of course, refused to debate any of his Republican challenges to date. Election day then is the first Tuesday in November. All going according to plan, the results will get certified by Congress on January 6th. That is, of course, a date that now carries a lot of baggage in America. And the person who is elected president, they will start their term nearly a year from now on January 20th, 2025. Ros, it is a long US election season to come and a lot of twists and turns.